Something that has been on my mind lately is this CD here, which I listened to quite a lot these last weeks. Dolci Sospiri by the United Continuo Ensemble and Jan van Elsacker, who present the works of Andrea Falconieri, one of those central figures in music history that listeners today really deserve to know more about. Now, even though the piece I played earlier is by an Italian author, Marco dall'Aquila, who lived a whole century before Falconieri, you might have felt a sort of Spanish touch there, and that is no accident. The sequence of harmonies it is based on crops up all over music history, from the late Middle Ages to the 18th century, and further. As musical styles changed through the generations, it was reworked in countless different ways, but the quintessential chords always stayed the same, almost like a sort of Baroque 12-bar blues. The Italians later called it La Folia, the Spanish Los Folias, and the French Folie d'Espagne, the Spanish frenzy. When Andrea Falconieri was born in Naples, the long-lasting regency of Spanish viceroys technically made it a piece of Spain and Italy. Naples in the early 1600s was Europe's second largest city, right behind Paris. Rome had about 100,000 citizens at the time, Naples 4 times as much. Being a metropolis, its son Andrea Falconieri chose the life of a metropolitan himself, traveling all over Italy and Europe to serve different high-ranking nobles. One of his patrons was in fact Antonio de' Medici, who recently gained some internet fame with his portrait having been turned into a popular meme. Given its sheer size and the political situation, Naples was a huge center of cultural exchange, especially in between Spain and Italy, of course. When Caravaggio visited Naples in 1607, Falconieri was about 22 at the time, he left an enormous impression on the town's art scene, which eventually led to the development of a Neapolitan painting style that adopted Caravaggio's dramatic realism and his preference for depicting the lives of ordinary people from the street, as opposed to idealized figures in palaces and gardens, which was new and provocative at the time. This influence even shows in the works of Spain's most famous old master, Diego Velázquez, who was, throughout his life, in personal contact with the Neapolitan artists. This image here exemplifies an aesthetic of sound that came into huge fashion at that time and is very much recognizable in the music of Andrea Falconieri. Thomas Boysen, the artistic director of this record, made a series of very deliberate and effective decisions to reflect that in a musical program which ties the entire CD together. Essentially, there are 3 main pillars to this concept: the expressiveness of the human voice, a highly dynamic pair of violins, and an accompaniment with a whole assortment of plucked string instruments, most prominently the Baroque guitar, which gained immense popularity during Falconieri's time. Even though it was being played all over Europe, the guitar was already back then closely associated with Spanish culture and as such especially common in Naples. Hopkinson Smith gives a short introduction to it in this interview.
Aesthetically, in terms of the sound of the instrument, the Baroque guitar is closer to the lute than it is to the modern guitar. From the standpoint of the history of the instrument, of course, it's more related to the modern guitar. The Baroque guitar has 5 courses of strings. The top string is single, and the other 4 are double. It has a narrower body than the modern guitar, is somewhat shallower, has string length that's a little bit less, and it's extremely lightly built. And being lightly built, as is the lute, by the way, Being lightly built, this means that the strings you put on the instrument can be quite thin. That is, the instrument speaks with less tension than the modern guitar. Every modern instrument is heavier than its earlier counterpart. It's a whole nother aesthetic. It has more magic in the sound from my point of view.
To understand it as an evolution of the lute is a common misconception, however, and together with other plucked instruments such as the fiobo or harp, they existed in parallel and commonly were played together as perpetually exhibited on the CD. Thomas Boysen, who plays guitar, viola and fiobo himself on this record, actively searches and cultivates this distinctive, lush and colorful mixture of plucked strings. And as Andrea Falconieri was a lutenist himself, this unique approach to sound really seems to resonate with his composing style. To make this work, he was able to resort to a group of experienced musicians, specializing in just that, historically informed accompaniment with string instruments. The United Continuo Ensemble, having already collaborated in countless concerts and recording projects, exhibits a precision and ease in their accompaniment that one otherwise doesn't get to hear very often. Meanwhile, the duo of violins featured on this CD lend an element of unity, melodic elaboration and direction to the overall sonority of the group. There is a real sensitivity for sound color and melodic dynamism here that shines through the entire record.
Fortune, my foe, why dost thou frown on me? And will thy favors never lighter be?
Jan van Elsacker has a distinctive approach to vocal performance that is quite unlike anything else in Baroque music today. He manages to strike a middle ground in between historical awareness, a highly developed technique, and, perhaps most importantly, a truly personal and emotional way of recitation, which, in my opinion, really fits the music of Andrea Falconieri extremely well and manages to carry through this entire program.
Bella fanciulla dal viso rosato, chi m'hai privato di mia libertade, abbi pietà al mio gravi martiri. Bella fanciulla, non mi far morire. Fanciulla, non mi far morire.
The songs from Falconieri's collection of villanelle featured here are interconnected by a common theme and sentiment. It's all about passion, love sickness and desire. So apparently Italian pop music hasn't really changed that much through the ages. But there's something that sets the villanelle of Andrea Falconieri apart, of course, which is the simple and yet delicate and highly refined writing which the performance of United Continuo Ensemble and Jan van Elsacker further underlines. Compared to the century preceding Falconieri, his generation's musical style was a new development, a new music, as his contemporary Giulio Caccini called it, that consciously moved away from the complex and highly intellectual vocal polyphony that thrived during the 16th century. In contrast, the popular new style focused on lighter songs with a clear melodic outline, a singer not reciting in church Latin but everyday Italian vernacular. accompanied by instruments such as the guitar, fiobo, or harp.
Dolci sospiri, dolci martiri, dolci grida di merce pietate, dolci grida di merce pietate.
This combination of light popular themes with highly refined courtly culture seems to have struck a chord with the noble's taste in Falconieri's day. After all, that's exactly what Caravaggio's followers did in their art, depicting everyday life on the street in a refined way and thus reintroducing it to their patrons, the cultural elites of Europe. The mixture of those charming songs and the virtuosic instrumental performances form the backbone of Dolci Sospiri. They are the meat and potatoes of the program, so to say. And while I don't want to reveal all the surprises of the CD to you before you have a listen yourself, there's one particular standout track which I would like to introduce to you to round up this video. The CD contains this instrumental track, mysteriously titled Battaglia de Barabbasso, Yerno de Satanas, the battle of Barabbas, son-in-law to the devil. Sounds pretty dramatic, right? I began to wonder where I had heard of this concept of good and evil battling each other with musical instruments before, and then suddenly I remembered something.
The devil opened up his case and he said, "I'll start this show," and fire flew from his fingertips as he rosined up his bow. And he pulled the bow across the strings and it made an evil hiss. And then a band of demons joined in and it sounded something like this. Johnny said, "Well, you're pretty good, old son, but sit down in that chair right there and let me show you how it's done."
That might be understood as a hint at American traditional music going back way further than one would think at first. At this point, you perhaps want to know where to listen to the rest of Dolci Sospiri, and for a first listen, there is Spotify, but if you actually want to support the artist, I wholeheartedly recommend you have a look on iTunes, where it is about $10, I think, or Amazon for a physical copy. If you'd like to find out more about the United Continuo Ensemble or Thomas Boysen, here are the links to their respective websites, where you'll also find their upcoming concert dates. Next week, I'll continue right where I left off in this video and present something about the historic relationship between music and warfare, from the Renaissance to Jimi Hendrix, right here on this YouTube channel, which is called Memo. If you wouldn't want to miss that, you could subscribe right here on YouTube, on Facebook or Instagram. There's a new video every Friday, so I hope to see you next week, and until then...